Hello, everyone. Dr. Shermak here, and welcome to week 8 here in Journalism 205, Multimedia Journalism. I'm excited because we're turning the tables a little bit this week, and we're starting to get into, I think, what it really means to be a journalist, and that is talking to people. And our focus this week primarily will be on interviewing. Um, it will also have you dabble for the first time in video. And of course, interviewing is how we move people's words to our audience. And so it's vital that we learn how to do it well and get some practice in doing so. So, on today's lecture, we're going to talk about interviewing and some of the reasons why we do it, some of the basics. This particular discussion that I'm doing about interviewing can apply to video, can apply to any sort of print or text-based journalism that you do. It really applies to interviews of any type for any journalistic purpose. It's just some overviews, primarily consisting of things that I've learned over the years, working not only as a journalist myself, but also as a researcher, conducting interviews as a researcher, because that's really kind of what you're doing as a journalist is conducting research of people in order to tell their story. So we'll give a good overview. And then we'll take a look ahead to what you have in store for this week 8 as we pass our midterm point here in the semester. So, why do journalists conduct interviews? Why is it important for journalists to do interviews? Well, this is the ultimate act of reporting. This is where you get the best information. We can all go and look up information on the internet. That's important. We need to do that. We can go to the library. We can go and look up I'm sorry, data sets and find information there. But what gives our work the most character and what helps us tell the best stories are interviews and talking to people. And you absolutely have to talk to people in order to be journalists. I know sometimes, even the best of us can get stranger danger. Maybe our social battery is a little low and we don't feel like talking to people. You can't do journalism that way. This is why journalism differentiates itself from research and book reports and other types of writing. It's because people are involved. So it's really important to learn how to talk to people. Um, Interviews for most stories should be your primary source of information. That's where you go to get the most up to date, the most pertinent information for a story you're covering. One of my favorite things about interviewing is it's probably the most dynamic part of the news gathering process. So, like I mentioned a moment ago, we can do research, we can look up things online, but interviewing tends to throw you some curveballs, which is good. Um, if you went into every interview with an expectation and then you just find out what exactly you expected, that wouldn't be very fun. Part of the fun of interviewing and doing journalism is being introduced to things you did not expect. And that happens a lot during interviews. And that's one of the most exciting things I think is that you can experience as a journalist. It allows you to learn, it allows you to add more to your story. A great question to ask an interview subject kind of towards the end of an interview is, what more should I add to the story? Or was there a question that I should have asked? Or what would you add to what you've already told me? Those are perfectly acceptable and actually excellent questions to expand the knowledge that you are gathering in order to put in your story. It's also an opportunity to build relationships and do some networking. This could be maybe for personal networking, although you got to be careful with ethics there. But when I'm talking about building relationships, I think the best example might be on a beat. Let's say you're covering a particular beat for a newspaper. Maybe it's the education beat and you're out covering Board of Education meetings. When you start talking to people, particularly when you start talking to those people in person, you begin to build connections, you begin to establish relationships. Stories break, you're going to be the one who can contact them to get quotes. They send you story ideas. It becomes this really, really powerful, fruitful relationship. So interviews establish that. These conversations establish that. And you really want to have those relationships as a journalist. Um, just never forget, and I say this all the time, so hopefully you can't forget it, is that journalism is all about people. And in order to do it, you have to be able to talk to people. So I kind of break out interviews into two different types. The most common and most frequent that you will do is the one-on-one interview where you're talking directly to a person. Maybe it's just you and one person. Sometimes maybe it's you and maybe one or two, up to three people. But typically these are one-on-one. And this is kind of a deep dive conversation. It's much more intimate. Um, and this is something that's typically better for sensitive topics if you're talking about crime, if there's a exclusive, if there's some kind of controversial issue, one-on-one interviews typically are a little bit better for this environment. They're also very follow-up friendly. You know, you have an opportunity at the end of the interview to say, hey, what's the best way for me to reach you? Can I ask you follow-up questions, so on and so forth? Another sort of interview type is the press conference. And a press conference is a scenario where a group or an organization will put out, you know, a couple people in front of the press, and the press will have an option to ask them questions as a group. These are typically less common, and you know, the smaller the market, the less likely you are to have a press conference. When you get into a larger market, the odds of you participating in a press conference increase a little bit. They're typically related to major events, major stories. It's a really efficient way for people to share information. It's an efficient way for people to ask questions. You do need to be kind of aggressive if you have a question you want answered. A lot of times your fellow journalists from other outlets might ask the question that you want to ask. That's okay. You're still getting that answer and you still have every right to use that answer. Um, so it's kind of a good thing in a way to play off your colleagues and play off even your competitors at other news outlets. We're going to focus primarily talking about the one-on-one interview because, again, that's the most common type, and it's what you'll be doing for your assignment over the next 2 weeks. I've created a little bit of a hierarchy of interviewing. And what I mean by this is the hierarchy runs from the most ideal way to interview someone to the least ideal way to interview someone. Still the best of the best, even though we live in this age where we have many different communicative tools at our disposal, the best of the best is talking to someone in person, face to face. I know y'all are taking an online class, you're taking an asynchronous class. Most of you I've never seen in person. I know that's convenient. In journalism, yes, you can still use those types of communication tools, but the very best way to interview someone is to do it in person. And not only that, it's to do it on their turf, if you will. It's to do it at a location that might help you learn a little bit more about them. I'm going to give you an example. I had a student when I taught at Cal State Fullerton who wrote a profile story about this gentleman who was he collected scrap metal and basically junk. And he took that junk and he recycled it and turned it into art. And this particular student, his name is Matt. Matt came to me after he had done the interview and he had written his draft. And he basically said, this sucks. This story stinks. I don't like it. I don't feel like I have a lot to work with. Can you offer any help? And the first question I asked him was, I said, how did the interview go? Tell me a little bit about the interview. And he went on to tell me that he did a phone interview with this artist. And I said, Matt, think about the environment where this artist is working. He has to have some crazy warehouse garage workspace where he keeps all this junk. You need to go there. You need to go there and talk to him and see him in his environment. And I said, that's all the advice I'm giving you for right now. Go do another interview. It's okay. And he had a little time left, and Matt very wisely came to me early for feedback, which is always a good idea. And he went in and he decided to go do another interview. And he called up the gentleman, the artist, and said, "Hey, can I come to you to do an interview?" And the guy said, "Sure." And a lot of people like that with a lot of stuff, love to show it off. So in that situation, always try to ask for something like that. But anyway, Matt went, and his next draft was absolutely outstanding. Wonderful quotes, description. His lead of his story described this garage where this guy had old tire rims and old dryers and just all this scrap metal and painted this beautiful picture. It's nothing he could have ever captured on a phone call. Maybe he could have captured it a little bit on a Zoom, but being there in person, breathing the same air as your subject, looking at the same objects around them, that is the best way to interview someone. And you should always strive to interview someone in person. If you have the opportunity, make the opportunity. Is that always possible? It's not. It's absolutely not. It's the best option, though. So aim for that. Always aim for that best way to interview someone. And if you can't, then fall to another way. I would say the second best way to interview someone is what we're doing. Well, the tool I'm using right now, you're watching me on YouTube, but the tool I'm using right now is Zoom. To do a Zoom or a FaceTime, some kind of video call, I say this because when you have a video, at least, even though you're not in the same environment, at least you can pick up on uh, their facial cues. You can hear some of the audio cues in their voice, their tone, so on and so forth. It really gives you a more complete picture. The next option is a phone call. Again, this still has you in a live conversation with someone. Um, Phone calls are super common in journalism. I don't want to make them sound like they're a bad thing. They happen all the time. Breaking stories do not afford you the opportunity typically to go talk to someone in person. It's usually a phone call or a video call. So I don't want to say that they're bad. They're just a little bit lesser, a little bit less effective than face to face in person. But phone calls can work really well. Now let's fall off the table. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. Probably the worst way to talk to someone for a story is via email. Now, please get this straight. Um, I don't mean sending an email to set up an interview. If you want to try setting up an interview, try an email. If they don't get back to you within a day, make a phone call. If they don't get back to you within that next day, go knock on a door. But it's okay to set up an interview. But oftentimes students will say, hey, I want to interview for this story. Here's an email. Here's 10 questions I want you to answer. Bad. All right. Don't do that. What happens is the subject starts doing your labor for you. They're writing the answers. Um, and people, when they get email questions, tend to make them very polished. They're less authentic than you would find if you asked them that question in person or even on the phone. Um, Email is something you want to avoid. Now, having said all that, there are some instances where you deal with sources who might only agree to an email interview. They might say, I'm not going to talk to you on the phone. I'm not going to talk to you in person. Email them questions and I will respond. I've had this happen already this semester with some students for the Questonian. And my advice there is, okay, you got to play the game. You got to kind of play ball with your sources. And if that's the only way they're going to respond to you, then play the game. Send the email questions. But if you have your own agency, if you have your own choice on how to interview someone, try your best to do it in person. Try your best. If you have the time and the means, try your best to do it in person. Next best step is a video call. Next one after that is a phone call. Avoid email interviews if you can. 3 steps to being successful with an interview. Let's break these down. I call them preparation, engagement, and follow up. Preparation, engagement, and follow up. These all have to be executed well in order to be successful with interviews. So let's talk about preparation. One thing you want to do is try to reach out ahead of time and very early on to your interview subjects. You are not their top priority. You will rarely be someone's top priority who you want to interview. It could be your top priority at the moment, but your subject rarely prioritizes someone from the press, to talk to. So the minute you get an assignment, the minute you get a story assignment, try to reach out to your interview subjects the first moment you have, because it can take people a long time to get back to you. And when you do that, that can be via email. That's fine. I said it a moment ago, though. Don't give them a lot of time. Send an email. If you hear back to that with them from them right away, great. If you don't hear back from them within 24 hours, pick up the phone. I would advise you to pick up the phone immediately. It's harder to avoid a phone call than it is an email. Talk to them about what you're doing. Tell them about the story you want to write. Sometimes people get spooked out if you say, I'm from a newspaper and I want to interview you. People wonder, well, what for? Why? What purpose? Start off by saying, I'm from an interview and I'm from an interview. I'm from a newspaper and I'm writing a story about X. Here's how I think you could help me tell the story of X. Make them feel special, make them feel vital to the story. If you want to ask for a time, ask for a very specific time. Don't say, well, I'll call you after 3 o'clock, because after 3 o'clock could be 3:01 or it could be 12 midnight. Get very specific. Say, I'm going to call you at 3:30 on Tuesday. That helps a ton. Um, Avoid asking questions like, I'm looking for a few quotes. Can you give me a quote? No, it's a conversation. Say to them, I want to talk to you about, or ask you some questions about, or have a conversation about. A quote is sounds very transactional. You give me a quote, we're done. Button. Talk to them. One thing that I cannot stress enough is give them your deadline. Let them know that you are on a deadline. Tell them, I want to talk to you on Wednesday because I need to turn the story in by Friday. Let them know. They don't know your deadline. They don't know about journalistic practices. They might not have any idea that there is such a thing. So put them on notice in a way and let them know your deadline. Um, when you finally are ready to go do the interview, whether that's something you set up in advance or maybe you're going to go talk to someone, before or after a live event like a meeting or a sports game or something, make sure your equipment is ready to go. As I always say in this class, you can do all the work in this class with your phone, but make sure it's ready to go. Record your interviews. You always want to have a backup, a non-digital backup, an analog backup, but always record your interviews. Don't forget to ask permission to record. That's a state law here in California. Um, but you can use your voice memo app on your phone. That works very well. Another one that I recommend always is Otter. Otter is great because it uses AI to transcribe the conversation happening live, and then you can download that text file and look through that. It's a lot easier than going back and listening to the recording and trying to take notes. I also use an app called Tape a Call. It does have a cost associated with it now. It's like $5 a month, but if you're doing a lot of phone interviews, it's well worth it. You can actually record and then transcribe the phone call. Voice Record Pro is another good app, but like I said, your old-fashioned voice memo app can do it really well too. Um, Make sure your batteries are charged. Always charge your phone. Take a charger with you. If you have an extra battery pack, that's even better. Make sure you have that and it's available. Um, Test things out. Make sure you have the right cords. If you're using an external microphone, test that out. Be super prepared. And like I just mentioned, have a pen and paper. Have something that you can take that's analog. If the digital fails, and it will, then you have at least a backup and you can take notes. Okay. That preparation is so key. Sometimes interviews will demand that you do a little bit more preparation than others. I'll give you an example. So when I was a journalist, I covered sports a lot, and I would go to a game, and there were a lot of times where I couldn't really prepare my questions before the game because the game would dictate what questions I was going to ask. So I was jotting down ideas for questions during the game. But if you're interviewing someone for a profile story or a feature story, try to take, I would say, 5 to 10 questions with you. Don't be harsh on yourself and think, well, if I don't get to all the questions, I'm a failure. That's not it. Sometimes your interview goes in different directions, and you might ask questions you never expected to ask. But try to take 5 to 10 with you. A great way to generate questions is using something called the Gauss formula. Gauss is an acronym for goals, obstacles, solutions, and start. So a question related to goals might be, what are you trying to accomplish? Think about the app. the applicability of that question. It really applies to a lot of different types of stories. Obstacles, what problems did you face? What are your challenges? Solutions, how did you handle these problems and challenges? And then a great question is start. How did this all begin? And then a follow up to that is where is it going? Those are some ways to generate questions. It's just a good old fashioned brainstorm. Jot them down, type them, and take them with you to your interview. That way you'll be prepared once you start. The best way, I think, to start any interview, especially if you're dealing with a breaking story where maybe someone's going through a lot, is ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? That's a great question. It's wide open. It's a really powerful question. Um, Review any information you can get your hands on about the person or the event before you go. Look at their social media, look at press releases, meeting agendas, anything you could find. Because what you want to do is demonstrate to your subject that you know them, that you understand them, that you've done your homework. That creates a great deal of trust. It creates reputation. Be prepared. Your interview subjects will respond better to you if you were prepared for your interview. So now we're on the interview, and this is what I call engagement. I mentioned this a couple moments ago, but it's worth mentioning again. Record your interviews. Always, always, always. You have to ask for permission. Not only is that a best practice, but it's also law. And then as you're recording, things go wrong with recordings. It's happened to me. It's happened probably to every journalist, whether they want to admit it or not. Always have a piece of paper. I like to write down as I'm recording, maybe a little timestamp about a point where they said something awesome that I know is going to be a quote. You have these aha moments. You're like, that's the quote I'm going to use after my lead, or that's the quote that I'm going to use to close out the story. They hit you in real time. So have a way to record that. I get ahead of myself on my slides. You guys should know that by now. But I would say assertive yet respectful is the way you want to operate. Be a human. Ask them how they're doing off the bat. Sometimes that's a really incredible way to get it going. You want to make it a conversation, not an interrogation. People come into interviews with journalists expecting an interrogation, even on the most bland subject you could imagine. Change that up. Make it a conversation. You can be nice and do good journalism. I truly believe that. Um, if you're speaking more than your subject, that's a problem. You want to be doing more listening than speaking. I'm a talker. I love to talk, and I had to work on this a little bit, to be honest. Yes, it can be a conversation, but you want to be doing a lot of listening. Don't forget about some of the most powerful questions we have as journalists, and that is the how and the why. Keep asking those. You want to avoid questions that can be answered yes or no. And if they do try, and a lot of people will try to answer a question yes or no, ask questions like, can you explain that further? Or tell me more. I love that question. Tell me more. It's not really a question, it's kind of a command. But tell me more about that. Or can you tell me more about that? That's a great one. It shows you're listening and it pushes them a little bit to go deeper. Um, for generating the questions, don't forget our 5 W's and 1 H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Those can be questions that you ask as well. All right. Very powerful. Those basics are important here with the engagement. And you can even use those in prep as well. Some questions that you might ask, and then, you know, this is something that you want to elicit some kind of emotions, because you're looking for information, but you're also looking for quotes that you can use in the story. We should hear from the sources in your story. And it's pretty easy in multimedia journalism, because when you're interviewing someone, we're obviously hearing from them. This is kind of a print thing, but these questions can be used for any output that you're going to do. Tell me about the time when, tell me the story of, describe the conversation. What were the steps that got you from A to B? How did that make you feel? Notice these can't be answered with yes or no. And you can see some of the other examples up here on your screen. So, try to create questions and ask questions that evoke memories, that evoke stories. Um, that's the best way to interview. Easier said than done. But don't forget, this takes practice. It takes practice. And you might do an interview and then realize later, man, I wish I would have asked this question. Follow up. Follow up. That's what we're going to talk about next. When you leave that initial interview, don't forget to ask, what is the best way for me to follow up with you? Some people say, hey, just, if you want to follow up, send me an email and establish that. And you can email them and say, hey, can I pick up the phone and give you a call? I have a couple questions I thought about. A lot of people are very amicable to this. They'll like that follow up. It shows a thoroughness in your reporting. Um, so see how they want to proceed, but always have a plan for what's next. Um, Immediately after your interview, try as soon as you can to sit down and think about that interview and take some of your own notes. What stood out? What jumped out? What do you think was the most important thing you learned? What was the most astounding quotes? Think about our news values here. All right. What's the impact? Is there novelty involved? Timeliness, all those things we've been discussing with news values, apply those to your interview because you've just done a great deal of news gathering through your interview. And then if you can, after you've done kind of a mental recap of the interview, try to start writing your story as soon as you possibly can. Well, this is in your mind, for it's fresh in your mind, because you're going to come out of that interview probably really invigorated to do the story. You're going to feel good. You're going to feel like, I got a lot of information. If you let that sit for a day, two, three, four, that's going to fade away a little bit. Come out, grab that momentum. I believe in momentum in journalism. It's a thing. Grab that momentum and do something with it and write your story. If you are in a press conference situation, don't be hesitant to follow up on other people's questions, to press the source a little bit or ask clarifying questions. That's important too. So I said questions, but we're not live. Um, some big takeaways here. Um, Preparation, engagement, follow up. Those three things are really important to have successful interviews. It takes practice, don't forget that. But if you do the preparation, the engagement's going to be much easier. If you do the preparation, the follow up's going to be much easier. It all starts with those preparatory steps. So, as you embark on interviewing this week, and this is not the last interview you're going to do, you're going to have other interviews down the line that you'll need to do for this class. As you embark on interviewing, bear in mind that this is the number one way to get information for your stories. And we got to work around that stranger danger if you have it. Okay. How will we do that? Well, there's a number of videos and handouts that I have for you to take a look at for week 8. Watch the videos, look at the handouts. Part of that, of course, is this video that you're watching now. We have a week 8 quiz that includes this video, the other videos assigned, as well as the handouts, um, and then current events as usual, as we always do. Week 8 discussion is actually a follow-up to our Follow a Journalist assignment from week 7. And what that's going to do is ask you to take a look at what your peers found and write a response to one of your peers' presentations. So just like we'd have a discussion if we were in the classroom, you're going to have that discussion on a discussion board. And then we're going to start our next major assignment, which is the video interview. The full assignment is available here in week 7, but that is not due until, I'm sorry, here in week 8, but that is not due until the end of week 9. So you do have those 2 weeks to work on it, which is kind of what we typically do in class. But the video interview is a chance for you to sort of dabble in talking to people and then getting that on camera. So it's a long description for the assignment, but I do that on purpose because it's kind of a teaching slash assignment all in one. So take a look at that. If you have questions on that or anything at all, please let me know. Have a wonderful week 8, and we will see you next time here on the video discussion. Take care, everyone, and thanks for watching.